It was one of those lazy Saturday afternoons when you have nothing planned, but somehow end up doing something that changes your entire life. Jake was walking through the old weekend market downtown, the kind of place where vendors sell everything, from handmade soaps to vintage records that smell like someone's attic. He wasn't looking for anything specific. His friends were meeting for dinner later, and he had about 2 hours to kill. The market was busy with couples holding hands, families with kids running around, and people like him just wandering aimlessly through the maze of colorful stalls. Jake had always been the single guy in his friend group. At 28, he'd been on plenty of dates, but nothing ever seemed to stick. His friends would joke that he was too picky, but deep down, he just hadn't felt that spark everyone talks about. He was starting to think maybe he was one of those people who just weren't meant for serious relationships. The smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery stall mixed with the scent of old books and handmade candles as he made his way through the crowd. Street musicians played soft guitar music in the background, creating that perfect weekend market atmosphere that makes you feel like you're in a movie. That's when he spotted the old woman's jewelry stall tucked between a vintage clothing booth and someone selling homemade honey. Her table was covered with a deep purple cloth, and scattered across it were dozens of pieces that looked like they belonged in a museum. Necklaces with stones he couldn't identify, rings that seemed to have tiny stories carved into them, and bracelets that caught the afternoon sunlight in the most beautiful way. The woman herself was probably in her 70s, with silver hair braided down her back and eyes that seemed to see right through you. She wore layers of colorful scarves and had the kind of weathered hands that told you she lived through some interesting times. Jake wasn't usually drawn to jewelry, but something made him stop. Maybe it was the way everything seemed to shimmer slightly in the dappled sunlight filtering through the market's canvas awnings. Looking for something special? The woman asked, her voice carrying just a hint of an accent he couldn't place. Just browsing, Jake replied, but his eyes kept moving across her collection. Then he saw it. Sitting slightly apart from the other pieces was a bracelet that seemed to pulse with its own energy. It was silver, but not the kind of bright, shiny silver you see in regular jewelry stores. This was older, more complex. The metal had been worked into intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change depending on how the light hit them. Small bells, no bigger than his thumbnail, hung from delicate chains along its length. Between the decorative elements were symbols he'd never seen before, carved so precisely they looked almost alive. "Ah, you have good taste," the woman said, noticing where his attention had focused. "That one is very special." Jake picked up the bracelet, surprised by how warm it felt in his hands. The bells made the softest, most musical sound when they moved together. It was heavier than he expected, solid and real in a way that made him think it had been crafted by someone who really knew what they were doing. "What makes it special?" he asked, though he wasn't sure why he was even asking. He didn't believe in magical jewelry or anything like that. The woman smiled, and there was something almost mischievous in her expression. "It belonged to my grandmother. Back in the old country, she always said it had a way of bringing people together who were meant to be together." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Like a love charm?" "Not exactly," she said, carefully rewrapping a necklace another customer had decided not to buy. "More like it helps people see what was already there. Sometimes we need a little push to be brave enough to open our hearts." The whole thing sounded completely ridiculous to Jake, but he found himself still holding the bracelet. His friend Lisa's birthday party was coming up next weekend, and he still hadn't bought her a gift. Lisa was always complaining about her terrible dating luck, how she seemed to attract all the wrong guys or scare away the right ones. The bracelet would actually make a pretty funny gag gift. He could present it as a magical love charm, and everyone would get a good laugh out of it. Lisa had a great sense of humor about that kind of thing, and she'd probably wear it just to be a good sport about the joke. "How much?" he asked, already reaching for his wallet. $15, the woman replied. But as she took his money, she looked at him seriously. "But remember, young man, sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about these things. You might be surprised by what happens when you give someone a gift with good intentions. Even if you think it's just a joke. Jake laughed as he slipped the bracelet into his jacket pocket. I'll keep that in mind. As he walked away from the stall, he could hear the woman chuckling softly to herself. But when he glanced back, she was already helping another customer. Acting like their conversation had never happened, the rest of his walk through the market felt different somehow. Colors seemed brighter, sounds seemed clearer, and he found himself paying attention to couples in a way he never had before. There was something about the weight of the bracelet in his pocket that made him more aware of the connections happening around him. He grabbed a coffee from one of the vendors and sat on a nearby bench, watching people pass by. A young couple shared a pastry, laughing as they got powdered sugar on each other's faces. An elderly pair walked slowly hand in hand, still clearly crazy about each other after what must have been decades together. Even the street musicians seemed to be playing more romantic songs than usual. Jake pulled out his phone to check the time and saw a text from Lisa, asking if he was still coming to dinner with the group. As he typed back his response, he could feel the bracelet in his pocket, and for some reason, he found himself smiling. Maybe it was just the beautiful afternoon, or maybe it was the anticipation of giving Lisa a gift he knew would make her laugh. But Jake felt optimistic in a way he hadn't in months. He had no idea that the simple silver bracelet in his pocket was about to turn his entire world upside down. The dinner with friends was still hours away, but already Jake was looking forward to next weekend's birthday party in a way that surprised him. Something told him it was going to be interesting. Lisa's apartment was buzzing with energy when Jake arrived at her birthday party. The following Saturday, the living room was decorated with colorful balloons and string lights, and the smell of homemade pizza filled the air. About 15 of their mutual friends had gathered, creating that perfect mix of laughter and conversation that made Jake glad he'd decided to come. He spotted Lisa right away, wearing a bright yellow dress that made her look happy and confident. She was in the middle of telling a story about her latest dating disaster to a group of friends, who were practically crying with laughter. Jake had known Lisa for about 3 years now, ever since they met at their friend Tom's housewarming party, and she always had the best stories about her romantic misadventures. Jake, Lisa called out when she saw him, giving him a warm hug. I'm so glad you made it. Did you bring me something amazing? Jake grinned and patted the small wrapped box in his jacket pocket. Oh, you have no idea. This gift is going to change your life. Now I'm scared, Lisa laughed, leading him toward the kitchen where drinks were set up on the counter. The party was in full swing by the time they got to the gift opening part of the evening. Lisa had received the usual assortment of birthday presents, a funny coffee mug, some bath bombs, a gift card to her favorite bookstore, and a houseplant that she immediately named George. When Jake's turn came, he stood up with an exaggerated sense of ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the room, I present to Lisa a gift that will solve all her relationship problems forever. Everyone laughed. Knowing Jake's sense of humor, Lisa shook her head, smiling as she accepted the small box. You're ridiculous, she said, but Jake could see she was curious. As she unwrapped the gift, Jake launched into his prepared speech. This, my dear friend, is a genuine ancient love charm, purchased from a mysterious old woman at the weekend market. She assured me it has the power to bring together people who are meant to be together. Lisa opened the box and her expression immediately changed. Instead of the eye roll and sarcastic comment everyone expected, she went quiet. She lifted the bracelet out of the box carefully, holding it up to the light streaming in from her living room window. Oh wow, she said softly, and everyone leaned in to get a better look. The bracelet was even more beautiful than Jake remembered. The afternoon sunlight coming through Lisa's window caught the silver in a way that made the intricate patterns seem to move and dance. The tiny bells chimed gently as Lisa turned it in her hands, creating a sound that was somehow both delicate and captivating. Jake, this is actually gorgeous, Lisa said, and there was genuine surprise in her voice. Where did you really get this? I told you, mysterious old woman at the market, Jake replied. But he was watching Lisa's face with growing fascination. She said it belonged to her grandmother and had special powers. Their friend Amy reached over to touch the bracelet. "It feels really old," she said, "like genuinely antique." "Jake, are you sure this was only $15? Lisa was still staring at the bracelet, running her fingers over the carved symbols. "These markings are incredible. They're so detailed." She looked up at Jake with an expression he'd never seen before. "You really bought this for me?" "Well, yeah," Jake said, suddenly feeling a little self-conscious. "I thought you'd get a kick out of the whole love charm thing." Without another word, Lisa fastened the bracelet around her wrist. The moment the clasp clicked into place, something shifted in the room. It was subtle, but Jake felt it immediately. Lisa seemed to sit up straighter, and there was a new confidence in the way she moved her hands. "How does it feel?" their friend Ben asked, clearly entertained by the whole situation. Lisa looked directly at Jake, holding his gaze in a way that made his stomach do a little flip. "It feels right," she said simply. The bells on the bracelet chimed softly as she reached for her drink, and Jake found the sound oddly mesmerizing. Had Lisa always had such expressive eyes? Had her smile always been that warm when she looked at him? "So does this mean you're going to find your soulmate now?" Amy teased. But Lisa didn't look away from Jake. "Maybe I already have," Lisa said quietly, and the room fell silent for a moment. Jake felt his heart skip a beat. Was she joking? Was this still part of the birthday party entertainment? But there was something in Lisa's voice, something in the way she was looking at him, that didn't feel like a joke at all. Tom broke the moment by suggesting they play some music, and the party resumed its normal rhythm. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in those few seconds. When Lisa put on the bracelet, throughout the rest of the evening, Jake found himself stealing glances at Lisa. She seemed different somehow, more vibrant, more present. She laughed louder at his jokes, stood closer to him when they were talking, and every time she moved, the soft chimming of the bracelet seemed to draw his attention. When she brought out the birthday cake, she made a point of standing next to Jake while everyone sang. When she blew out the candles, she looked at him just before making her wish, and Jake couldn't help wondering what she'd asked for. "Thank you for this," Lisa said later. As the party was winding down and people were starting to leave, she touched the bracelet gently, making the bells sing. "I know you meant it as a joke, but it's honestly the most thoughtful gift anyone's given me in years." Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I'm glad you like it," he said, and he meant it more than he'd expected to. As he was getting ready to leave, Lisa hugged him goodbye, and Jake noticed she held on just a little longer than usual. The bracelet pressed against his back through her sleeve, and he could feel its warmth through the fabric. Walking home that night, Jake couldn't stop thinking about the way Lisa had looked at him when she put on the bracelet, about the way her whole presence had seemed to change, about the way his own heart had responded to that change. Maybe it was just his imagination, but Jake had the strangest feeling that his $15 joke gift had just set something in motion that neither of them had been expecting. The Monday morning after Lisa's birthday party, Jake was sitting at his desk at work when his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it expecting maybe a work email notification, but instead saw Lisa's name on the screen. "Good morning. Hope you slept well. I'm still thinking about Saturday night." Jake stared at the message for a moment. Lisa had never texted him on a Monday morning before. Usually their communication was limited to group chats about weekend plans or the occasional funny meme. He typed back a casual response, but before he could even put his phone down, another message appeared. It was a photo of her coffee cup, sitting on what looked like her kitchen counter. The bracelet was clearly visible on her wrist as she held the mug, the silver catching the morning sunlight streaming through her window. "This bracelet is becoming my favorite accessory," she wrote underneath the photo. Over the next few days, the messages kept coming, not constantly, but more frequently than ever before. Lisa would send him pictures of things she found interesting during her day. A funny sign she saw walking to work, a cute dog at the park, her lunch that she was particularly proud of making. And in every single photo, the bracelet was there, gleaming on her wrist. Jake found himself looking forward to these messages in a way that surprised him. He catched himself checking his phone more often than usual, hoping to see her name pop up on his screen. When Wednesday evening rolled around and their usual friend group met for trivia night at O'Malley's pub, Jake arrived early, genuinely excited to see Lisa in person. She walked in about 10 minutes after him, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. There was something different about the way she moved, the way she carried herself. Lisa had always been pretty, but tonight she seemed to glow with a confidence he'd never noticed before. Her hair caught the dim pub lighting perfectly, and she was wearing a flowing top that made the bracelet stand out beautifully against her skin. "Hey, Jake," she said, sliding into the booth next to him instead of across from him like she usually did. "I saved you a seat." The comment didn't make much sense since he'd been sitting there first, but Jake didn't mind, having Lisa sitting close enough that he could smell her perfume and hear the soft chimming of the bracelet every time she moved was definitely not a bad thing. Throughout the trivia game, Jake became increasingly aware of how often Lisa touched his arm when making a point, how she leaned in close when she wanted to whisper an answer, how her laugh seemed to ring out more clearly than everyone else's. Every gesture was accompanied by the gentle music of those tiny bells, and Jake found the sound strangely hypnotic. "Earth to Jake," their friend Ben said during the break between rounds. "You're staring." Jake snapped back to attention, realizing he'd been watching Lisa as she got up to order another round of drinks. "What? No, I wasn't, dude. You've been watching her all night like she's the most fascinating person in the world," Tom chimed, and with a grin. "What's going on with you two?" "Nothing's going on," Jake protested. But even as he said it, he wasn't entirely sure it was true. "We're friends, same as always." Amy raised an eyebrow. "Same as always?" "Jake, she's been practically glued to your side since she got here. And don't think we haven't noticed all the texting lately." Jake was about to deny the texting comment when Lisa returned with their drinks, settling back into the seat next to him and immediately picking up where their previous conversation had left off. The bracelet chimed softly as she gestured, and Jake found his attention drawn to her hands, to the way the silver seemed to complement her skin tone perfectly. After trivia night, the group usually went their separate ways, but Lisa lingered as everyone else said their goodbyes. "Want to walk with me to the parking garage?" she asked, even though Jake's car was parked on the street in the opposite direction. They walked slowly through the quiet downtown streets, and Jake noticed that Lisa seemed in no hurry to reach her destination. She talked about her work, about a book she was reading, about plans for the upcoming weekend. But underneath the casual conversation, there was an energy Jake couldn't quite identify. "I have to ask you something," Lisa said as they reached her car. She leaned against the driver's side door and looked at him seriously. "Did you really just buy that bracelet as a joke gift?" Jake felt his heart rate pick up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, did you put any thought into it beyond just getting a laugh?" She touched the bracelet absently, making it chime. "Because ever since I put this on, I've been thinking about things differently." "What kind of things?" Jake asked, though he had a feeling he knew where this was going. Lisa was quiet for a moment, looking down at the bracelet and then back up at him. "About us, about our friendship, about whether maybe there's something more there that we've both been too scared to notice." The words hung in the air between them, and Jake felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. For 3 years, he and Lisa had been just friends, good friends, comfortable friends. The kind of friends who could talk about anything except the possibility that they might be something more. "Lisa," he started, but she held up her hand. "I know it sounds crazy," she said quickly. "I know it probably seems like I'm reading too much into a piece of jewelry. But Jake, ever since Saturday night, I can't stop thinking about you, not just as a friend, but as more." Jake stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. The streetlight above them cast a warm glow over the parking garage, and the bracelet seemed to shimmer with its own light. "You're not crazy," he said finally. "I've been thinking about you too, more than I probably should." Lisa's face lit up with a smile that made Jake's chest feel tight. "Really? Really?" He confirmed, taking a step closer to her. I just thought. I mean, we've been friends for so long. I didn't want to mess that up. What if we didn't mess it up? Lisa asked softly. What if we made it better? Standing there in the parking garage, with the bracelet chiming softly between them and 3 years of friendship suddenly feeling like it had been leading to this exact moment. Jake realized that maybe the old woman at the market had known exactly what she was doing when she sold him that bracelet. Maybe some jokes weren't jokes at all. Maybe they were just the universe's way of giving you the push you needed to see what had been right in front of you all along. The week after their conversation in the parking garage felt like stepping into a completely different world. Jake and Lisa had decided to take things slow, to see where their new feelings might lead without rushing into anything that could damage their friendship. But taking it slow proved to be more challenging than either of them had expected. It started with coffee dates that weren't officially dates. Lisa would text Jake in the morning asking if he wanted to grab coffee before work, and they meet at the little cafe halfway between their apartments. These weren't their usual group hangouts or casual friend meetings. These were just the two of them, sitting across from each other at a small table, talking about everything and nothing while the bracelet caught the morning sunlight streaming through the cafe windows. Jake found himself noticing things about Lisa he'd somehow missed in 3 years of friendship. The way she stirred her coffee counterclockwise exactly 7 times before taking her first sip. How she always tucked a strand of hair behind her left ear when she was thinking about something serious. The musical laugh she had when something genuinely amused her, completely different from her polite social laugh. And always, there was the bracelet. It had become such a natural part of Lisa that Jake couldn't imagine her without it. The soft chimming of the bells had become the soundtrack to their conversations, a gentle reminder of the mysterious old woman who had somehow known exactly what she was doing when she sold him that piece of jewelry. 3 weeks into their new dynamic, Lisa invited Jake over to her apartment for dinner. Not for a party, not with their friend group, just the two of them. She was making homemade pasta, she said, and she bought ingredients for way too much food. Jake arrived at 7 o'clock with a bottle of wine and flowers he debated buying for 20 minutes at the grocery store. Were flowers too much? Not enough? He'd settled on a small bouquet of sunflowers because they seemed cheerful and not overly romantic. You brought flowers, Lisa said when she opened the door, and her smile was so bright it made Jake's decision feel perfect. Her apartment smelled incredible, like garlic and herbs and something he couldn't identify, but that made him feel immediately at home. Lisa had set the small dining table with candles and her good dishes, the ones she usually saved for holidays. The bracelet sparkled in the candlelight as she moved around the kitchen, putting finishing touches on their meal. Dinner was perfect in the way that simple things often are. The pasta was delicious, the wine was exactly the right choice, and their conversation flowed as easily as it always had, but with an underlying current of something new and exciting. Jake found himself watching Lisa's hands as she gestured while telling a story about her coworker, mesmerized by the way the bracelet caught the flickering candlelight. After dinner, they moved to the couch with the rest of the wine. Lisa had put on soft music, and the atmosphere felt intimate in a way that made Jake's heart race and his palms sweat at the same time. I need to tell you something, Lisa said, curling up on the opposite end of the couch and facing him. The bracelet chimed softly as she tucked her legs under her. I've been thinking about that night in the parking garage, about what I said about the bracelet making me think differently. Jake set down his wine glass, giving her his full attention. What about it? I think I was wrong, she said, and Jake felt his stomach drop. I don't think the bracelet made me think differently about you. I think it just gave me permission to admit what I was already thinking. Relief flooded through Jake so quickly he almost felt dizzy. What do you mean? Lisa looked down at the bracelet, turning it slowly around her wrist. I think I've had feelings for you for a long time, Jake. Maybe since we met. But you were always so clearly just wanting to be friends, and I didn't want to make things weird between us, Lisa. Jake said softly, moving closer to her on the couch. I thought the same thing about you. I thought you just saw me as the funny friend who would never be anything more." She looked up at him, and in the candlelight from the dining room, her eyes seemed to sparkle with the same mysterious light as the bracelet. So we were both just as scared to say anything. Apparently, Jake said, reaching out to touch her hand. 3 years of being scared. Lisa's fingers intertwined with his, and the bracelet chimed gently against their joined hands. "I'm not scared anymore," she said quietly. "Neither am I," Jake replied, and he meant it completely. The kiss happened so naturally it felt like they'd been building toward it 4 years, which Jake realized they probably had been. Lisa's lips were soft and warm, and she tasted like the wine they'd been sharing in something uniquely her. The bracelet chimed softly as she moved closer to him, and Jake thought dimly that he'd never heard a more beautiful sound. When they finally broke apart, Lisa rested her forehead against his, both of them breathing a little unsteadily. "So," she said with a smile that made Jake's heart do somersaults, "I guess that settles it." "Settles what?" Jake asked, though he was pretty sure he knew. "Whether we're still just friends," Lisa said, and the bracelet sang its gentle song as she laughed. Jake kissed her again, longer this time, and thought about the mysterious old woman who had insisted the bracelet would bring together people who were meant to be together. Whether it was magic or coincidence, or just the power of finally being brave enough to take a chance. Jake was grateful for whatever force had led him to that market stall on that lazy Saturday afternoon. Later that evening, as they sat together on the couch talking about everything and nothing, Jake noticed that the bracelet seemed to catch and reflect the light differently now, as if it too was satisfied with how things had turned out. Maybe some gifts really were meant to change lives, even when you thought you were just making a joke. 6 months later, Jake and Lisa were inseparable. What had started as careful, tentative steps into something more than friendship had blossomed into the kind of relationship that made their friends joke about how disgustingly happy they were together. They had moved in together just 2 months after that first dinner at Lisa's apartment, and their shared space felt like the most natural thing in the world. The bracelet had become such a constant presence that Jake sometimes forgot there had ever been a time when Lisa didn't wear it. It had become part of her identity, something that caught the light during important moments and chimed softly during quiet evenings at home. Their friends often joked that it was the best $15 Jake had ever spent, though none of them suspected just how mysterious the origins of that purchase had actually been. One sunny Saturday morning, almost exactly 6 months after Lisa's birthday party, they decided to visit the weekend market together. It had become one of their favorite weekend activities, browsing through the stalls, trying samples from the food vendors, and listening to the street musicians. But today, Jake had a specific mission. "I want to find that woman who sold me the bracelet," Jake explained as they walked through the familiar maze of colorful stalls. "I want to thank her." Lisa touched the bracelet absently, making it chime. "That's sweet. I'd love to meet her too. I want to ask her about the symbols carved into it. I've looked them up online, but can't find anything that matches exactly." They made their way to the spot where Jake remembered the jewelry stall had been, between what was now a vintage clothing booth and the honey vendor who Jake recognized from his previous visit. But instead of the elderly woman with silver braids and knowing eyes, they found a middle-aged man selling handmade leather goods. "Excuse me," Lisa said politely. "Do you know what happened to the woman who was selling jewelry here about 6 months ago?" The man looked up from the wallet he was tooling and gave them a confused look. "Jewelry? I've been in this spot every weekend for the past 2 years. There's never been anyone selling jewelry here." Jake felt a weird chill run down his spine. "Are you sure?" She was an older woman, maybe in her 70s, with long silver hair. She had a table full of antique jewelry. "No, definitely not," the man said, shaking his head. "Like I said, I've been here for 2 years. Before me, this spot was empty for months because the rent was too high for most vendors." Jake and Lisa exchanged glances. This couldn't be right. Jake remembered exactly where the stall had been, remembered the purple cloth covering the table, remembered the way the sunlight had filtered through the market's canvas awnings, and made all the jewelry sparkle. They spent the next hour walking through the entire market, asking every vendor they could find. The honey seller didn't remember any jewelry vendor. The woman selling vintage books had been coming to this market for 5 years and insisted there had never been anyone matching the description Jake gave. Even the market manager, a cheerful woman with a clipboard who seemed to know every vendor personally, had no record of anyone selling antique jewelry in the past year. This is impossible, Jake said as they sat on a bench in the center of the market, sharing a funnel cake from one of the food stalls. I bought that bracelet from someone. I have the receipt somewhere at home. Lisa was turning the bracelet around her wrist, studying the intricate patterns and mysterious symbols. Maybe we should check your receipt when we get home. Maybe there's a name or something that could help us track her down. But when they got back to their apartment and Jake dug through his wallet, through the drawer where he kept old receipts, through every piece of paper he could find, there was no receipt from the market, no record of the purchase at all. Okay, this is getting weird, Lisa said, sitting cross-legged on their bed while Jake continued searching through boxes of old papers. It's like she never existed. Jake sat down next to her, feeling frustrated and more than a little unsettled. But she had to exist. I didn't imagine buying this bracelet. I didn't imagine our conversation about her grandmother and the old country. Lisa took his hand, and the bracelet chimed softly between them. Maybe the receipt just got lost. Maybe she was only there for one weekend. There could be lots of explanations. They talked about it for hours that evening, trying to come up with logical reasons why no one at the market remembered the mysterious jewelry vendor. Maybe she had been visiting from out of town. Maybe she only came to the market occasionally. Maybe Jake had confused the location or the timing. But deep down, both of them were starting to suspect that something genuinely strange had happened that day. 6 months ago. What if, Lisa said later that night as they lay in bed, what if she wasn't exactly normal? Jake turned to look at her in the dim light filtering through their bedroom window. What do you mean? I mean, what if there really was something magical about this whole thing? Lisa held up her wrist, and the bracelet seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. What if she was exactly what she seemed to be, someone who knew? This bracelet would bring us together. Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering the possibility. 6 months ago, he would have laughed at the idea. But 6 months ago, he had also been convinced he and Lisa were destined to be nothing more than friends. Does it matter? He asked finally. What do you mean? Jake propped himself up on his elbow and looked at Lisa seriously. I mean, does it matter if she was magical or just a regular person who happened to have good intuition? Does it matter if the bracelet has actual powers or if it just gave us both an excuse to be brave? Lisa smiled. And even in the dim light, Jake could see the warmth in her eyes. When you put it that way, no, it doesn't matter at all. She took off the bracelet for the first time since the night of her birthday party and set it carefully on the nightstand between them. The tiny bells chimed one last time before falling silent. The bracelet didn't create what we have, Lisa said softly. It just helped us see it. Jake reached over and took her hand, no longer hearing the familiar chiming that had become the soundtrack to their love story. So what happens now? Now we write our own story, Lisa said, moving closer to him. No magic required. The next morning, Jake woke up before Lisa and lay in bed watching her sleep peacefully beside him. The bracelet sat quietly on the nightstand, looking like nothing more than a beautiful piece of vintage jewelry. But as the morning sunlight began to filter through their bedroom window, Jake could have sworn he saw it catch the light in that special way it always had, as if winking at him with satisfaction. Whether the mysterious vendor had been real or imagined, whether the bracelet was truly magical or simply a catalyst for courage, Jake knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the best jokes are the ones that change your life completely, and somewhere, in a place that might exist only in the space between possibility and reality, an elderly woman with knowing eyes and silver braids smiled to herself, already looking for the next person who needed a little push toward love.